Hello everyone. Let me start with a challenge, or you can assume that as a problem statement as well for today's video. So the problem is that there are three tests which I have already mentioned in this class: first test, second test and third test. And in the three tests we are doing the same assertion. The only difference is about the test data. In all the three test cases, you can see the usernames are different and the assertion is same. We are validating that all the usernames should ends with xyz.com. My question is it a good practice to write the test case in this way? If we have to do the same steps again and again with the only difference of test data, is it a good thing? Or can we write this in some other ways as well in TestNG? So we are going to learn these things today. Our agenda is: what is data provider annotation? What is data provider attribute in test annotation? And what is data provider class attribute in @test annotation? So we are going to learn these three things, and you will also understand that how we can resolve the challenge which we saw in this video. Let's learn what is data provider annotation. It is a way to pass method parameters in the test functions. It is a part of data-driven testing. So we saw in this video that if you would like to run the same steps with the only difference of test data, we have to use multiple times @test methods in the multiple test methods. But we can use these annotations, and we have to only write one test method with the use of this @DataProvider annotation. Let's start learn how to use @DataProvider annotation, which we saw in the slide recently. So just write data provider in this way. When you write the data provider, it would add a import from org.testng.annotations.dataprovider. Okay, the data provider annotations work similar like the @test annotation. Okay, and we will learn about the attributes of the data provider annotation in our next video. So let me write public, and please remember one thing which I forget to add in the Google slide, that data provider annotations returns a 2D array of objects. So let me write object, and then let me write a 2D array of in this way, and then I can write the method name. So I am writing method name to data provider method. Okay, and this is our method. So it is expecting a return of 2D array of object. Let me write return new object in this way, and then I can write the values inside it. Okay, so what are the values we will write? We are writing the same values which we have defined in this video. So let me write abc@xyz.com, then let me write def@xyz.com, and then let me write ghi@xyz.com. Okay, so these are the three values which I have defined in our data provider annotation and inside the data provider method. So it is returning a 2D array of object where each array of object is defining a value, a parameter value. Okay, so that's all about the data provider annotation. We will learn more in this video how we can use this data provider annotation in our test method, and how we can reduce these multiple test methods to a single test method. Data provider attribute in @test annotation. So this attribute would help to share the data provider information which you have defined as a data provider name. If you have not defined the data provider name, then you can use method name as well. So you can use this attribute as we have used other attributes in @text annotation like priority, depends on methods, depends on groups. So we can use this attribute in a similar way. Now let's understand this with our demo. Okay, so we can use same @test and we can write public void data provider test, okay, like the other test methods we have defined. And let me copy this line because this is the common line in all the test methods which we have defined here. Only the difference is username. So let me take the username from as a data parameter like this way, and in this way we are writing a single test for irrespective of multiple tests. But how we can use this data provider? We can just write data provider like this, and you can define the name of this data provider. So here like this way. Let me just comment down these three methods and write only a single method. Okay, now let me run this and see what is the output. So when we run this, there are two test cases which are passed and the last test case which are failed, because in our last test case we used ghi@xy.com instead of xyz.com. So we don't have a requirement to write multiple @test. Okay, just write a single @test with the data provider, because only the test data is different, the steps are same. Even you can use this in the if you have to validate login functionality with different username and password, you can just define username and password in the data providers, and you can write data provider in this way, and you don't have to open or close the browser, you don't have to open the same website again and again, and you don't have to write multiple times that how should you enter the username and password. It is like a data driven testing. Okay, we are doing using the data provider. Okay, we can also define the data provider method in the base class as well. Like we can either use and define this in other classes as well. To define in other classes, it should be either the parent class of this class or the grandparent class of this class. Okay, so what you can use, you just let me open the base test class and paste the code of data provider in this, and then let me extend the base test and let me just comment down this code and it will also work. Let me show you by running this using the TestNG test, and if you see the three test cases are running and where the two test cases are passing and one test case is failing. So you can use the data provider annotation in the base test or in the parent class also. Okay, and to use the data provider in another class which is not a parent class or which is not a which is not a parent class of any classes, then you cannot use there's an attribute which you have to use, that is data provider class attribute, which we are going to provide the class attribute in @test annotation. So in the data provider class attribute, you can define the class name where you have defined the @data provider annotation. Suppose you have defined the data provider annotation in another class, okay, and you would like to use that data provider annotation in some other class, and their test method is in another class. So you can use this attribute to define the class name where you have defined the data provider attribute. Also, if you will not specify this attribute, means if you will not specify the data provider class attribute, then the data provider attribute will look on the same class or one of its base class. So for the second point, we recently looked in the demo section where I've defined the data provider annotation in the base class. Understand it with a demo. Let me remove this data provider from here, which we have commented it, and let me also remove the 3 test classes to make our code clean. Okay, and let me go to this base test, and let me just rename this class. Okay, let me rename it to DataProvider class. Okay, so when I rename it, it is asking, let me rename this, rename file to dpclass.java. Perfect. And removing this extends part. Okay, now there is no link between dpclass.java and challenge to use multiple data class. Okay, now how can we make the link? We can make the link using the data provider class attribute, which we just saw in the video. How? You can just define dp class dot class. Okay, in this way you have defined your data provider in this class dp class dot class, and you have you are telling the TestNG that use this data provider from this dp class. Okay, so when I am running this, let me run this. So it will run all the 3 test cases, pass, pass, fail, because we have defined the data provider class as well. Okay, if I will not define this data provider class, suppose like I have not defined, and when I try to run this, it will throw an error. See, error, this method requires a data provider name, because this data provider method is not present either in this class or not one of its parents class. So to define it, we have to use data provider class. So we can use data provider class like this, and then it will pick this data provider method name from this data provider class. So that's all about the data provider attribute. So today what we learned what is data provider attribute, how we can use the data provider attribute, what is data provider annotation, and how we use the data provider class attribute as well in the TestNG. So that's all for today from my side. Thank you everyone.